They are free, and you do get credit for watching them. It gives me great privilege and honor to introduce a gentleman that I've worked with for the past 6 years on my side of the deal. He's a FAASTeam program manager from out in Las Vegas, and I'm not exactly sure what region you cover. Western Pacific. There we go. These guys with the FAA are not necessarily located where they do and what they do. They do it remotely a lot of times, and Ken has joined us here. He'll be talking to this morning about pre-flight inspection and going beyond the pre-flight. Ken has quite a vast experience in aviation. He's been with the industry for a long time, been with the FAA for 15 years, and been in the safety program for over 7 years. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ken Kelly.
Thank you, Dennis. Good morning, everyone. For the advantage of our folks tuning in on the internet, this presentation is a little bit interactive. For those of you in the audience, you should have picked up the handouts. You'll notice you have a copy of the pre-flight inspection checklist, and there's also another sheet in there that goes through those sections of the checklist. That's where you're going to write down items that you see wrong in some of the photos that we're going to be showing. For those that are viewing remotely, just have a notepad around, and as we go through the pre-flight inspection, if you see anything wrong with the aircraft, just make a note of that, and then after we do the pre-flight inspection, we will go through it again. Give you a chance to read that. It is said that every aircraft accident has an accident chain. There's no one item in particular that causes the event that leads to the accident. It is a series of events, and breaking any one of the links in the accident chain has a great possibility of making it possible that there is no accident. Our objective today, we're going to use some photos of an actual pre-flight. The audience is going to perform the pre-flight inspection by looking at those photos. After the pre-flight, we're going to discuss any additional items not covered by the factory checklist, and then we're going to review the pre-flight inspection again with the discrepancies pointed out. And we're going to discuss what is meant by going beyond the pre-flight. Some of the materials you should have in front of you for the audience that's here is the 172N pre-flight inspection checklist. You'll have the pre-flight workshop, pre-flight handout, and an advanced pre-flight article. That article is just for your information to review at your convenience. Over the years, NTSB and FAA data has shown that a number of accidents have causal factors related to pre-flight activities. While loss of control flights lead the pack when it comes to GA fatal accidents, the NTSB accident data from 2000 to 2009 shows poor pre-flight inspections caused or contributed to 156 GA accidents and 41 fatalities. One way of shoring up your pre-flight skills is to follow the steps of an advanced pre-flight. Remember that you, as pilot in command, are the last link in the accident chain. You're the last chance there is to take some action that will help avoid an accident. Let's talk about what type of pre-flight that you normally do. Are you a kick the tires and light the fires type of a pilot, or do you follow your checklist to the T? Or are you the pilot that performs a pre-flight looking for problems? Before we look at the pre-flight photos, make sure you have a pencil or pen or something to write down the discrepancies on your list. And then after viewing the pre-flight and noting the discrepancies, we'll view it again with all that stuff pointed out. And for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to be performing the checklist, or the pre-flight, following the checklist to the T. When you're performing the pre-flight inspection, try to block out any preconceived ideas of what you expect to see while doing the pre-flight with the mindset, what will I find this time? Like the slide says, it's one thing to look at the airplane during a pre-flight, but what we want you to do is actually see the airplane. Some aircraft were issued airplane flight manuals, AFMs, and those were as simple as a sheet of paper. Some have owner manuals, while others have FAA-approved pilot operating handbooks. The pre-flight inspection procedures are found in Section 4 of the AFM and the POHs. Most older vintage aircraft may not have a pre-flight inspection checklist available. In this case, it's prudent for the owner or the operator to devise a checklist. You can use other aircraft as a guide and then include any items that are particular to your aircraft when building your own checklist. For older aircraft that do not have an FAA-approved POH, most of the operating limitations are in the form of placards. Use a checklist to perform the pre-flight inspection. If the manufacturer's checklist is not available, create one to fit your aircraft using another aircraft like I mentioned earlier. The pre-flight checklist you have with you now is one that was taken directly out of the POH for the 172N. So referencing your checklist, we're going to go through the pre-flight. We start in the cabin. Control wheel lock is removed. In this particular slide, I'll just give you one. We didn't pull out the control lock. It was a little windy that day. Ignition switch is off. Avionics master switch off. Master switch is on. Check your fuel quantity indicators. Master switch is off. Okay, the next step is in the cabin. Check your baggage drawer. Check the lock. If you have a child seat is occupied, make sure that door is locked. Moving to section 2 is the empennage. Rudder gust lock is removed. The tail tie down is disconnected. Your control surfaces, check for freedom of movement. I'll point out too, in these photos, there are some photos, there are items that are in there, and there are other photos that there's actually nothing there, so you don't have to look too hard at them sometimes. Again, moving through the empennage area, checking your flight controls. Again, still moving through the empennage, making sure the tail tie down is disconnected. Still going through the flight controls. And again, the last section on the empennage. If you think you see something and you need to check it, you can feel free to walk up, take a quick peek, and I'll just hold the photos until you're done. Okay, moving on from the empennage, the checklist now has us moving from the empennage to the right wing trailing edge. Checklist has us checking the aileron for freedom of movement and security. Again, just following the walk-around pattern, checking the aileron still. Always look up and down the wing as you move along. Now looking at the right wing tip, and the checklist has us removing the tail, or removing the tie down. Checklist now has us going to the main wheel, check it for proper inflation. And then on the right wing, before the first flight of the day and after each refueling, use a fuel sampler cup. Drain a small quantity of fuel from the fuel tank sump, quick drain, and check for water, sediment, and proper fuel grade. Under the right wing, after checking the fuel quantity, make sure the fuel filler cap is secured. And as we follow the checklist, we move from the fuel cap to the nose. On the nose part of the checklist, the engine oil level is checked. There's a notation there, do not operate less than 4 quarts, fill to 6 quarts for extended flight. Before the first flight of the day and after each refueling, pull out the fuel strainer drain knob for about 4 seconds to clear the fuel strainer of possible water and sediment. For those that may not be familiar with the 172, that knob is actually inside the cowling underneath that door that we're looking at. From there, the checklist has us moving to the propeller and spinner, check for nicks and security. Then to the landing lights, check for condition and cleanliness. For the purpose of this presentation, we actually didn't photograph the landing light being on. Then check your carburetor air filter, check for restrictions by dust or other foreign matter. Still just moving around the checklist, looking for items that aren't supposed to be there. And they have us moving down to the nose wheel strut and tire assembly. Check for proper inflation. If you have a nose tie down, have that disconnected. Again, just checking the nose tire for any discrepancies. From there, the checklist moves us up to the static port opening. Check for any blockage. That's where the static port is located on 172. Checklist then moves us to the left wing. It starts out with the main tire. Check for proper inflation. Again, still looking at the main landing gear. Checklist then moves us up to sump the fuel drain on the left tank. Then the checklist moves us up to the fuel filler cap, ensure that it is secured. Checklist then moves us out to remove the pitot tube cover. Check it for any blockage. Bugs love pitot tubes. They like to make nests in them, so be sure to look down in there if you can. Check the fuel vent opening for any other blockage also. 172, it's located right behind the lift strut. Check your stall warning for blockage also. Make sure it's operating properly. Disconnect the wing tie down. From there, the checklist has us moving from the leading edge around to the trailing edge. We'll always check our lights. Check the aileron for freedom of movement and security. That's physically the last item on the checklist for the 172. We'll just keep moving on down the leading or trailing edge. So at this point, you've done the pre-flight, or you're actually ready to fly. Okay, before we start reviewing the photos again, let's talk about a couple of items that aren't included on the checklist. Because to me, that was a pretty quick, semi-lame pre-flight inspection. What about the documentation for the aircraft? Everybody's familiar with ARROW, airworthiness, registration, operating limitations, weight and balance. Those are all items that need to be in the aircraft before you fly, so technically before doing your pre-flight, you should make sure all that is on board. So this is a copy of an airworthiness certificate that's in the aircraft. I don't know if you can see it in the audience, but you'll see the pink piece of paper behind the registration. This aircraft, when we did this photo shoot, was actually recently purchased, so it had the pink temporary in it. Of course, there's a weight and balance. Checklist in Section 1 does not address inspecting the radios for operation. Inspection of the interior is not covered either. For example, what about ensuring that your seat locks are functioning properly? Seat belts are in good condition and they're operating. What about testing the elevator trim for freedom of movement, turning the fuel selector to select the appropriate fuel tank in order to sump fuel from the fuel strainer? If you're in the off position, you go to sump fuel at the strainer and you just pull it up and you're not watching what's going on, you're only going to get a little dribble of fuel out of there instead of an actual gush of fuel in order to flush out any sediment or any water that could be in the system. Let's discuss the exterior of the cabin and the aft fuselage. Those areas aren't even mentioned in the checklist. Like any other surface of the aircraft, you'd be looking for loose or missing panels, missing fasteners, operation of any lights, and condition of your antennas. The checklist also doesn't talk about the nav lights. The landing lights mentioned in Section 5, but where is the nav lights mentioned? There's no reference to inspecting the leading edge of the right wing for damage or inspecting the cabin air inlets for obstructions by debris and various creatures, including wasps. I don't know if any of you have ever flown an aircraft and opened your air vents only to be surprised by a bunch of really angry, stinging insects. It's not a good thing. The Section 5 of the checklist does not address the security of your cowling. Section 7 of the checklist talks about the left wing leading edge, and Section 4 talks about the right wing, but nothing about the leading edge of the right wing. Even though Section 7 discusses the pitot tube, the fuel tank vent, the stall warning openings, There's no reference to inspecting the leading edge for damage or inspecting the cabin air inlets for obstructions. Another item missing from the checklist is the practice of lowering the flaps for inspection. And the photos we just viewed that were additional to the things from the original check or the original inspection, did you notice anything else? And as we've talked about, or we just demonstrated, following the checklist to the T may not cover everything that you should actually be looking at. And it's highly recommended that you follow a checklist. So what do you do now? Consider the manufacturer's checklist as a minimum standard to follow. If you find it's lacking in some areas, then create your own checklist. Just make sure that it includes all the items on the manufacturer's original checklist and any additional items that you deem necessary. And then for those of you that are into modern technology, you can use your smartphone, your iPads. There's several apps that are out there. Some are aircraft specific. It's hard to see up there, but we have one for a Piper Cherokee, one from Cessna, and then TapCheck is another supplier. Those are all apps that you can download, put right on your phone. Okay, now we're going to go through the pre-flight again, but this time we're going to point out all the discrepancies that were on the aircraft. Airworthiness certificate. I don't know if you noticed it when you saw it the first time around. It says a Christian Industries Pitts S2B. I don't think the 172 would fly inverted or do snap rolls. That paperwork is from a different aircraft. You might think that's impossible, but for a large shop that's annually in several aircraft at one time, I've actually picked a set of records out of the back of an airplane, and it was for a totally different aircraft. And this scenario here has actually happened to another inspector I know, where the airworthiness certificate was for a totally different aircraft. Another thing that happened too, your airworthiness certificate has the N number. What if you just had the aircraft painted and you just had your new custom N number put on? You need a whole new airworthiness certificate because the N number does not match the one that's on the outside of the aircraft. And the other thing with, not the airworthiness certificate, but your registrations, they expire now. So you always got to check that expiration date. What about on the tail section? During the spring, birds are prolific. They love to build nests in every little opening of the aircraft. So make sure you look at all your hinge points, tail cones, engine cowlings. That tail skid's sideways on that. And you notice the tail tie-down ring is also bent. That aircraft at some point had a tail strike. If that wasn't there the last time you flew the aircraft or you rented the aircraft, you might want to have somebody take a look at the structure in the back of the aircraft. That's on the aft bulkhead. It only holds some minorly important controls, like the rudder. Up that rear bulkhead, it could really cause some problems. And the elevator trim tab. There's no cotter pin in the castellated nut. If that's loose, that elevator trim tab could flutter. It could actually rip the back of the airplane right off. This one flies slow enough, it may not, but on a faster performance aircraft, Bonanza, I've actually seen an airplane that actually fluttered. And guy got it on the ground, and it looked like somebody took a beer can, Coke can, and just wrinkled it back and forth. Missing screws. right wing. That's why it's important as you look at a surface, you look right along the bottom of it, right along the top of it. You'll see that the screws that are hanging down are very visible. Do your pre-flight with your fingers. Run your hands along all the surfaces as you walk around. You'll feel dents. You'll feel screws that are poking out if you don't see them. Just another view of the panel under the wing. Same thing, screws are hanging down. What color is your nav light lens on the right wing? It should be green, not red. It can be very important at night flying. Tire that's severely underflated. If you were not to catch that, you came in and landed, you could actually spin that tire, pull the valve cord or the valve stem right off the inner tube, and then you're out. Engine oil level is low, and there's also a missing fastener in the cowling. Several loose screws on the spinner. More loose screws, missing screws. Somebody left a rag in the cowl inlet. More missing fasteners. And the line guy during the last wash job was so courteous he didn't want to get water in the sag port. He left his gum stuck on the static port. That fuel filler cap is not on properly. For those that don't fly a Cessna, the ears on the fuel cap are always lined with the slipstream. They should actually be pointed longitudinally with the aircraft fuselage. This one may have been hard to spot. It's a broken safety wire on the brake caliper. Again, just like the right wing, the left wing has the wrong nav light lens. Talked about not lowering the flaps for ease of inspection. There's actually an inspection panel missing up behind the flap on the left wing. Talked about sumping the fuel. You see the difference? When you sump fuel, always hold it up to a contrasting surface. Water and blue fuel look almost identical when held up to the blue sky. Always put it up against a different color and you can see it shows up much, much better. Anything wrong with the nose wheel? Did you guys see anything wrong there? Pardon? Tow bar. Now, who would leave their tow bar on the front of the airplane before they go fly? It's happened more times than not. I actually had a customer try to taxi his King Air out with his little gas-powered tug still attached to his nose wheel. Had another customer that left his tow bar on the front of his Bonanza, and as he was taxiing out, it managed to bounce high enough to get into the propeller. So it does happen. So in light of that, we're going to talk a little bit about some tips and tricks in performing your pre-flight. and then suggestions to help you completing a very detailed pre-flight inspection. Distractions are the largest factors in forgetting items on your pre-flight inspection. Conversations, cell phone calls should be eliminated during the pre-flight. Use of a checklist will assist you in not forgetting an item, and if you're inadvertently interrupted, always go back a few steps and restart the inspection from there. Always do the inspection in an orderly manner. Do not perform it haphazard, going from one end of the aircraft to the other, side to side, then back to the middle. Keep it organized in sequential approach, any sequential approach, just like the checklist. There should be nothing on your mind but the pre-flight. Carry a rag and a flashlight with you when inspecting the aircraft. Clean off oil from surfaces so you can inspect that area. Oil and dirt can hide a multitude of problems. A bright flashlight is very important when inspecting areas like hinge lines and into dark areas of the fuselage and engine cowl. A flashlight's invaluable when trying to look at items when the sun's reflecting off the aircraft. It helps illuminate the fasteners on the control surface hinges, and the newer LED flashlights are very bright and consume very little battery power. If you don't have a flashlight handy, but you've got your smartphone, most of your smartphones have a flashlight app on them. Talked about the complacent attitude. Always approach you're inspecting a new aircraft for the first time before the first flight after maintenance has been performed. Keep your mind open to the identification of discrepancies. Your inspection should convince you the aircraft is safe for flight. Do not take the attitude that it was good the last time I looked at it, so it must be good this time. Being complacent in how you do your pre-flight can lead to you not seeing a defect when one exists. How many more times must the dipstick be forgotten on the cowling or across the spinner hub? How many more fuel caps will be left unsecured or the tow bar still attached? These are things that happen, but there are also things that are on the pre-flight checklist. So why are they continually missed? Have a plan if you need a mechanic. Keep the phone number of your mechanic or the mechanic of the rental aircraft handy. You never know when you'll need the AMT's device on an issue found during a pre-flight. Remember your smartphone. Take a photo, then text it to the mechanic. Get his opinion. And if you're in doubt of the condition of the aircraft, don't fly it. Have a plan B. It's broke, we're driving today. Pilots should always try to fuel your own aircraft. This will help ensure the correct grade and quantity is delivered. If you can't fuel the aircraft yourself, at least supervise it. The activity and supervise the activity and the proper grade and quantity is delivered. Try to park the aircraft on a level spot to ensure even fueling or to ensure the tanks are indeed topped off. Fueling on an uneven surface can give erroneous fuel level indications. After each flight, do a post-flight inspection. The pilot should walk around the aircraft looking for anything out of the ordinary following a flight. You should look for oil leaks, missing fasteners, damage from bird strikes, etc. It's much easier to have items repaired after a flight than trying to get things fixed prior to your next flight. There's a possibility of no AMTs being available to make repairs if you find discrepancies on your pre-flight on a weekend. It's a good idea to clean the aircraft at this time to verify all fluid levels. If you're waiting for the aircraft during maintenance, don't rush the guy. That's how screws and fasteners don't get put back on. Too much pressure on a mechanic trying to put things back together for you can lead to excessive stress. It could lead to more discrepancies being missed. Don't try to perform your pre-flight while maintenance is being performed. This should raise a red flag to anyone seeing it take place. Make certain the AMT aircraft and you verify is ready. Remember, it's the owner-operator's responsibility to ensure the appropriate logbook entries have been made for the maintenance performed. Get a briefing from the mechanic about the work performed and if that work would affect any change in the pre-flight inspection that you plan on doing. When performing a pre-flight after maintenance has been completed, be especially vigilant in looking for items that may have been left behind. Look for rags, tools, fluid spills, missing fasteners, etc. Verify proper operation of your flight controls and systems after maintenance was performed in those areas. The pilot should verify all maintenance record entries have been made, including 100-hour annual inspections, your ADs, DLTs, etc. If you're renting the aircraft, try to schedule time in advance of the flight for your review of those items. Clear communication with the mechanic is essential. You've been provided with a handout there about pre-flight inspections. That's for your review. Let's talk a little bit about going beyond the pre-flight. We touched a little bit on it in a few of the previous slides. We asked what kind of pre-flight or what type of pilot you are when it comes to doing your pre-flight. So how you answer that, let's ask one more question. When does it actually begin? When do you actually start doing your pre-flight? So when do you really do your pre-flight? If you're going on a local flight or just going up to do some pattern work, your pre-flight may start right there at the aircraft. What if you're going on a cross-country flight or a multi-day flight? Where should it start? Plan your route of flight, check your weather forecast early and again before takeoff. Check your aircraft performance compared to your destination airport and any alternate airports along your route. You need to check your weight and balance, calculate what fuel you'll need, and you need to file a flight plan. Where would you do most of those tasks? Maybe at home. Whether you're an aircraft owner or the renter, having intimate knowledge of the aircraft is very important. As a renter, it may be more difficult to review the aircraft records, and it would be prudent to ask ask the renter to have access to those records. You want to check your current inspection status of any ADs, any other open discrepancies on the aircraft. If the rental aircraft utilizes a status board for their aircraft, ask to be shown how they use that board. The more you learn about the airplane you're flying, the better off you are. A good pre-flight begins with thorough knowledge of your aircraft, knowing the records, knowing the history of the aircraft, and any idiosyncrasies for your aircraft. Every aircraft is a little different. Flown one for several times, and you get to know that airplane, you'll know that, this particular item tends to be a little strange every once in a while, and on the same model airplane, it could be another item. Some things fail at different rates. Talk to the mechanic that maintains that airplane. He can tell you, yeah, I keep seeing it come in every, so often it'll be, the left brake pads are always being replaced. Well, maybe they're hanging up. Maybe they need to do something different with that. Intimate knowledge of the aircraft systems and components and how they operate and interact is invaluable in trying to troubleshoot anything that you discover during your pre-flight. So check the aircraft's history, all of its systems and components. Any weak spots? And like I said, mechanic's your best buddy. Get to be friends with. Always prepare for the unexpected. Plan ahead for what may happen, like an engine failure. Think about what you would need to do and to be prepared for it. It's best to have a plan in your mind before anything happens. Always go through the scenarios in your mind. Where am I going to put this airplane down if the engine stops here? 20 minutes later in your flight, Ask yourself that question again. If it's on takeoff, what are you going to do? Use your risk management skills to mitigate your exposure to risk. Ask yourself if the risk is too high due to the weather. Is it too high due to a component that's inoperative? Is the risk too high because you're not feeling well? Use those decisions to help eliminate the risk or to mitigate it to acceptable levels. Break the links in the accident chain before it ever happens. Actually, before you ever get into the aircraft. I know we've covered many things in the previous slides to increase your knowledge about pre-flight inspection. So now do you think you're ready to fly? Talked a little bit about accident data. We've talked about pre-flight inspection and reviewed those results. Talked about some tips in assisting you in performing a pre-flight. We talked about the records and that what the pilot should review. Is there any questions? Not seeing anybody jumping up and down. Remember, the pre-flight, you did it the last time. Thank you very much.